Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and it is Friday the 13th, which, happens more than we may think. Often it'll happen, if it happens once, it'll happen several times in a year, depending on how the months fall out. And so I've never been particularly superstitious about, I almost said suspicious, maybe that too, but I've never been particularly superstitious, and so I've never had anything creepy or unlucky happen to me on Friday the 13th. I'm wondering if you have, if it's a day that fills you with worry, or if it's a day that, maybe you like that kind of stuff. Maybe you like the creepier side of things like Friday the 13th and Halloween and all of those good spine-chilling topics. I would love to hear of your Friday the 13th experiences. Do you avoid black cats? Do you do that every day? Do you avoid walking under ladders? Again, do you do that every day? Do you have different superstitions that you apply in your everyday life? Many people do, I know, and I am sure I have my own quirks that would be considered to be superstitious, but off the top of my head, I can't think of them at the moment. If they come to me, I'll let you know, because I'm sure you're just dying to know what my quirks are. No, you already know half of my quirks. My superstitions, you're probably dying to know what my superstitions might be, and I'll have to think about that, because I don't feel like I have too many of them, but I'm sure I must. I mean, everybody has those types of things. At any rate, this seems like a good day to talk about a fantasy trilogy, of which 2 books are currently out. As you can tell by the title of this episode, Chronicles of the One is the name of the trilogy or the series, and the author is Nora Roberts. You know what? I just said that that it's a trilogy. But I don't know that for 100% sure. I know that the first 2 are out, that the third one comes out in November. Let me just double check that date for you. And yes, it does come out in November. It comes out on November 26th. So if you're looking for something to read right around Thanksgiving, November 26th is also my parents' anniversary. So that's an easy date for me to remember. At any rate, this is, let's see, it does. And it says on the description for The Rise of Magics, which is the third one, that it is the conclusion of this trilogy. So I was correct in remembering that it was a trilogy, but we should never rely solely on my memory anymore. At any rate, if you're familiar with Nora Roberts, she writes romance. She puts out at least one standalone novel each year, and 1 or 2 in whatever current series. Usually those are either 3 or 4 books that she's writing. They often have a more fantasy element to them, but not always on the series. The standalone novels don't usually have a fantasy element to them. She also writes as J.D. Robb, the Dallas and Work series, and she puts out, I think I read she puts out 2 of those a year. So she writes a lot. And I have actually read some of what she's written about her writing process, and it's pretty intense. I mean, it's definitely her job, and she puts in at least 8 hours a day, and she has routines, and that's what she does. So more power to her. I mean, everybody's process is different, but this seems to work for her. So this one is one of her fantasy, maybe science fiction a little bit, because it is a dystopian, not a trilogy, which is a bit different for her. She's had other books or series, trilogies that were in the fantasy genre and dealt with magic, but this one takes place and often foreshadowed the end of the world if the characters did not do their part to take care of that. This takes place after what is called the Doom has struck and killed it's like 90% of the world's population, 75 to 90% of the world's population. The Doom actually turns out, it spreads as a sickness and pretty much kills everybody who catches it. The people who are left are immune. And then there's also, as the third book says, the rise of magics. So the Doom was actually caused by a magical not procedure, ceremony maybe being performed that broke a shield and started this process to, well, I don't know, destroy the world, destroy humanity. Not quite fully sure on that one yet. But when the Doom hit, some people were immune. Some people discovered suddenly that they had magical powers, and at any rate, then the world completely changed. So this is dystopian. The book starts at the time when the Doom starts, and then follows several characters throughout their experiences navigating, the world basically going to hell, and learning that there is magic, learning if they have it, how to deal with it, etc. So let me give you the description of year one from Amazon. It began on New Year's Eve. The sickness came on suddenly and spread quickly. The fear spread even faster. Within weeks, everything people counted on began to fail them. The electrical grid sputtered, law and government collapsed, and more than half of the world's population was decimated. Where there had been order, there was now chaos, and as the power of science and technology receded, magic rose up in its place. Some of it is good, like the witchcraft work by Lana Bingham, practicing in the loft apartment she shares with her lover Max. Some of it is unimaginably evil, and it can lurk anywhere, around a corner, in fetid tunnels beneath the river, or in the ones you know and love the most. As the word spreads that neither the immune nor the gifted are safe from the authorities who patrol the ravaged streets, and with nothing left to count on but each other, Lana and Max make their way out of a wrecked New York City. At the same time, other travelers are heading west too, into a new frontier. Chuck, a tech genius trying to hack his way through a world gone offline. Arliss, a journalist who has lost her audience but uses pen and paper to record the truth. Fred, her young colleague possessed of burgeoning abilities and an optimism that seems out of place in this bleak landscape. And Rachel and Jonah, a resourceful doctor and a paramedic who fend off despair with their determination to keep a young mother and 3 infants in their care alive. In a world of survivors where every stranger encountered could be either a savage or a savior, none of them knows exactly where they are heading or why. But a purpose awaits them that will shape their lives and the lives of all those who remain. The end has come. The beginning comes next. So that is the description of year one. It takes place in, as you can probably imagine, the first year after the Doom hits, and follows the survivors as they try to navigate this world that's gone crazy. Not only has a significant amount of the world's population died, but the infrastructures are failing, governments are failing, martial law is taking over in a lot of places, and you get this rise of magic. And let me just say my pet peeve. She didn't always write magic, M-A-G-I-C-K, but for the last several years, I don't know, several years, could be 10 years, could be 15 years, I don't know. I've been reading Nora Roberts since high school, and she's recently started spelling magic with a K, and it drives me crazy. Fortunately, when you listen to it on audiobook, you don't have to see the K, although I just know it's there. But I don't know, it just bugs me, and it's just my own pet peeve. It's really nothing to make me it's nothing to make me like throw the book down in disgust or anything, but there's an eye-rolling moment for me. Okay, so there's the rise of magics, both good and bad. So not only do you have, in this situation, if you watch any dystopian television or movies or read any dystopian books, you know that There's going to be vacuums created, power vacuums created, and people are going to fill those vacuums. Some of them are going to be good, some of them are going to be evil, some of them are going to be a combination of both. And so not only do you have those types of vacuums, but now with people discovering that they have magical abilities, you get dark magic versus light magic, and those forces are now fighting against each other. So that is the description of year one, the first of the trilogy. We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking a little bit more about that book and then looking at the second book of the series. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today about Nora Roberts' latest trilogy, The Chronicles of the One. And the first one in that series is Year One, which follows a group of survivors as they navigate the world after a global disaster. A few things about this book and this series. It's a departure from the way that Nora Roberts often writes. As I've mentioned, she writes a lot of trilogies and books that, what is the word? Quadrilogy? Is that a word? Anyway, quartets of books. Usually there are 3 or 4 books in these more fantasy type series that she writes. And often those trilogies, or if they're 4, follow a certain there's usually 3 couples. Let's say it's a trilogy. There's usually 3 couples in the first book. Let's say it's 3 brothers or 3 sisters or 3 friends, but it's usually 3 couples. And as each couple gets together in their respective book, then it moves the story forward, and we get more of whatever the story arc is. It keeps moving forward as the couples, find each other, find love, etc. And this is definitely a departure from that. You do have a bit of a love story with Max and Lana. They're already together when we meet them, and Lana discovers that she is pregnant during this time. There's a bit of a love story between Rachel and Jonah, which was mentioned in the description, or Rachel and Jonah were mentioned in the description. They are fleeing New York with a woman who just gave birth to twins, and who takes a third baby who was born the same day and whose mother died, and kind of everybody's dying at this point. So she basically is raising triplets in the apocalypse. Good for her. She doesn't have any magical abilities, but she can raise 3 babies in the apocalypse. So my hat goes off to her. So you do have some love interests and some love stories in this, but you don't get that, okay, this book's going to be about Max and Lana, and then the next book will be about Rachel and Jonah. That's not how this one is working. You get this group of survivors and their experiences as they travel, as they come together and figure out what they're going to do, how they're going to live, etc. And then you start getting inklings that the baby that Lana is pregnant with is different. And this baby was conceived on the night that the doom started, and you start to see that there's maybe more to this baby than meets the eye, and that drives a lot of the plot and a lot of the there's things that have to be protected against and figured out. Again, there are people in this world who are not nice people, as there are people in the regular world that are not nice people. But I just can only imagine that the apocalypse brings out the best and the worst in people, and that is what we get in this story. So that's the first book, and I don't want to give away everything, but it has been out for a while, and the second one is also out. As I said, the third one comes out in November. The second one is called Of Blood and Bone. It is, well, book 2, book 2 in the Chronicles of the One. And you get, so, you know, this is, okay, here's the thing. When I started listening to these, because I listened to them on audiobook, and a quick side note, Julia Whalen is the narrator of this trilogy, and she has been on the podcast with her book, is it My Oxford Year? The Oxford Year, My Oxford Year, I think. So I was very happy to get an audiobook series narrated by Julia. She does a great job. And so for some reason, I started listening to the second one first, and it took me like, I don't know, the first disc, an hour into it to be like, I don't think this is the first one. I was driving, and so I wasn't being really logical about it. So I had many spoilers about what was going on, what was going to happen in the first book, because I started listening to the second book first. But here is the second book in this trilogy, and the description is as follows. They look like an everyday family living an ordinary life. But beyond the edges of this peaceful farm, unimaginable forces of light and dark have been unleashed. Fallon Swift, approaching her 13th birthday, barely knows the world that existed before. The city where her parents lived, now in ruins and reclaimed by nature since the doom sickened and killed billions. Traveling anywhere is a danger as vicious gangs of raiders and fanatics called purity warriors search for their next victims. Those, like Fallon, in possession of gifts, are hunted, and the time is coming when her true nature, her identity as the One, can no longer be hidden. In a mysterious shelter in the forest, her training is about to begin under the guidance of Malik, whose skills have been honed over centuries. She will learn the old ways of healing, study and spar, encounter fairies and elves and shifters, and find powers she will take up, and find powers within herself she never imagined. And when the time is right, she will take up the sword and fight. For until she grows into the woman she was born to be, the world outside will never be whole again. So instead of, as I mentioned earlier, having a trilogy that focuses on 3 couples, the first book focuses on the survivors who are leaving where they have been residing, many of them in New York, but not all of them, and then coming together to form new communities and new lives in this crazy new world. But then we also know that there are legends, mythologies, whatever you would like to say, prophecies about the One, and that, as I mentioned, Lana and Max's baby is the One, and that is Fallon. So the first book covers that first year, and then we jump ahead because Fallon is 13 at the beginning of the second book, and we in this book we follow Fallon's journey of becoming the One. She's already fated to be the One, but she has to learn what that means. She's born with magical abilities. Both of her parents have magical abilities, and so she's born with them as well, but kind of supersized. And that's the thing, is that lots of people are born into this world now with magical abilities, and this is something that I maybe it'll be explained in the third book. I can't obviously comment on that because it's not out yet, but I felt like, okay, the doom happened, and it turns out that the doom was magically initiated and accelerated, but suddenly people have wings. People are fairies, people are elves, and they didn't know this before, but the doom like unleashes something, and that I felt like could have used a little more explanation, and again, maybe it will be explained in the next book, but I just felt like, okay, here we are, we're living, bam, sickness, half the world's population dies, more than half the world's population dies. Oh, look, I'm a fairy. I mean, people literally grow wings, and then non-magical people start having magical babies. Some magical people don't have magical babies, so yeah, there's some world building in there that I either didn't pick up on in my listening, or has not yet been explained, or maybe will not be explained. I don't know yet. I cannot tell you. But I like that this is a little bit of a departure for Roberts from the way she normally writes these trilogies. You know, I know there's going to be romance in there somewhere because she writes romance. She's a romance author. But to it is just it's a departure from the way she normally does, following those three couples, and each book has a couple that finds each other and furthers the overarching storyline of the series. Now we are focused on Fallon in this series and her training with Malik, who is kind of one of those people that is not terribly well explained. No, he is explained, but it's part of that world that suddenly comes to the fore after the doom that, hey, there is magic in the world, and we've either ignored it or it's just been shoved so far down that we didn't believe in it. Not really sure, but Malik is part of the old world that still believed in magic and believed in the One, and he has been called to train the One. So Fallon leaves her home at 13 to go train with him for 2 years. And then from there, she has to learn more, experience more, do more, start figuring out what it means that she is the One. How is she going to train an army, find an army, do all of this as a 15-year-old, because she's 15 when she finishes her training. And we are going to talk a little bit more about this, but let's go ahead and take that second break of the podcast. And when we come back, we'll wrap up this episode. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. We are speaking about the first and second books in the Chronicles of the One trilogy by Nora Roberts. And I feel like I have said enough now to give you an idea of the series and to give you an idea of the things that I was like, don't quite get that. But I really did enjoy it. I don't know if I've made that clear. I am enjoying the books. I am definitely enjoying Julia Whelan's narration of the books. Looking forward to that third one to find out how things are going to work out, because of course they're going to work out. That is one thing that I like about Nora Roberts. She may be a little formulaic in her writing, but I know that they're going to have a happy ending. That there's going to be a happily ever after, and sometimes I just need that type of book in my life to know that everything's going to work out. I know that there's going to be a romance, there's going to be some difficulties, but in the end, it all works out. So I don't want to give too much away, but as I said, the third one is coming out on November 26th, so just a little over 2 months. And if you are looking for something to read over Thanksgiving, you could do the whole trilogy, or if you've already read the first two, then you are looking, maybe you're looking forward to that. The third book is described as, well, I'm not going to read you the description of the third book, because I'm really remembering that there are some pretty significant, looks like spoilers. Not if you've read the second one, but if you haven't read the second one, there's some spoilers. So I've already spoiled enough for you probably. So I thought this was appropriate to talk about on Friday the 13th. And you may be wondering, well, okay, so yes, fantasy book about the end of the world is probably appropriate for Friday the 13th, but why didn't you talk about something more specific to Friday the 13th? And the answer to that is simple. I'm a wuss. Friday the 13th movies, TV shows, etc. usually are horror. I'm okay with creepy. I'm okay with paranormal. I don't like horror. So when you look up Friday the 13th. Obviously, you get the Friday the 13th movies. No, thank you. Not going to watch them. Too much gore, too much ick, too much blech. And Stan, if you're listening, my friend Stan, who I worked with a million years ago, almost 30 years ago. Let's not talk about that. He when we went to see a horror movie once, he was like, "It's a satire. It's just enjoy it. It's a satire." And I was like, "It's gross. It's creeping me out." So I'm a wimp. I don't like horror. And you've heard me say on the podcast before that I'm starting to like thrillers more, but as long as they're suspense thrillers or, but not icky, gory thrillers of that kind. So, I mean, as a kid, have I mentioned this on this podcast? Ghostbusters gave me nightmares. The Thriller video gave me nightmares. So, yeah, I'm a wimp. I've gotten better as I've gotten older, but I still know my limits. At any rate, I decided that I would look up what are some Friday the 13th books for children, because those aren't going to be, I hope, blood and guts. And this is Unlucky Reads for Kids on Friday the 13th. This is from several years ago, but the first one is There's a Monster in My Closet. Do bad things really happen on Friday the 13th? And what really is in Timmy's closet? That's an excellent question. Beware, It's Friday the 13th by Kate McMullen is unlucky number 13 in the Dragon Slayers Academy series. So that's nice. That's fun that it's the 13th book and she made a play on, she tied in Friday the 13th and you've got dragons. Well, Dragon Slayers. Oh, don't slay the dragons. I love dragons. Arthur and the Bad Luck Brain by Stephen Krensky. And that is Arthur from, PBS. I realize that he's also Arthur from, why does it say Stephen Krensky when it's Mark Brown who's the author? Did that come with a change? If you know the answer to that and I'm just not seeing it, let me know. Anyway, Arthur, if you know him from the PBS series or from the books of his name, there is an Arthur book for Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th from The Black Lagoon. That sounds creepy. Call Me Friday the 13th by Betty Bates. Why are we calling you Friday the 13th is my question. This is a book from 1985. It's got the one of those fabulous 80s covers. I don't know how to describe it, but if you saw it, you'd be like, yeah, I remember that from childhood. If you're old enough to remember that from childhood. Gussie McIver cannot get her father's attention until a series of major mishaps occur while her mother is away taking care of Gussie's sick grandmother. That's all the description you get. And so I don't know why we're supposed to call her Friday the 13th, or maybe we're supposed to call her on Friday the 13th. I don't know. But it's an option. Judy Moody and the Bad Luck Charm. I always like when series such as Judy Moody or, oh my goodness, I've talked about it on the podcast. Wow, my brain is so not good today. I'm going to blame Friday the 13th. But I like it when they have holiday-specific books in the series. Judy wins and does well at everything until something terrible happens to her lucky penny. Oh, dear. And then the last one is Knock on Wood and Poems About Superstitions. After reading these books, you and your kids are sure to have developed some opinion about superstitions. Enjoy the reads and don't step on a crack. So there are children's books out there about Friday the 13th. I'm sure there are books out there that explain how Friday the 13th came to be, how the number 13th came to be unlucky, etc., etc. And maybe this Knock on Wood Poems About Superstitions gives you some of the background on why we have certain superstitions in our lives. Not stepping on cracks. What's the saying from a kid? Step on a crack, break your mother's back. That's just horrible. So many things from when we were kids that we used to say and not even think about are really terrible. I mean, if you think about the words, rockabye baby, kind of depressing. Most of the nursery rhymes, weird, a little depressing, a little creepy, but maybe that's what you should read on Friday the 13th if you're a wimp like I am. Just think about all of the stuff that you said as a kid and wonder how we ever thought it was appropriate. Okay, so Friday the 13th, I hope you're still having a great day. And if you like Friday the 13th and you're celebrating by adopting a black cat, that's awesome because black pets are the least adoptable. So if you are inspired to adopt a black cat or a black dog, that's wonderful. Go to the shelter, find something, name it something appropriately spooky or something appropriately spookily adorable, whatever works for you. And I hope that if you are superstitious, nothing has happened to you today. At any rate, thank you so much for joining me. Please join me again. I've got 2 interviews this weekend that will be airing next week. The first of which will be on Tuesday. It is a book called Heartland. It's the 8th novel of Kimberly Stewart, and I hope that you will join me for that conversation. Hope you have a great weekend, and hope you find lots of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.